The story begins in a work office. Our protagonist works at the advertising department of the Grand Glory Company. Right away, we see that he is the type of person who works more than he can handle. His boss comes and starts saying that the company is going through a hard time, so a lot of people are being fired, so he should work more, sort of threatening him, you know? He then gives a list of potential clients for him to call them one by one, and that tomorrow he needs to show the results. So we can clearly see that his boss is a big asshole. So our protagonist keeps working even though he is really tired. Until something weird happened. Everything starts losing their focus and becomes pixelated. A mysterious figure appears on the protagonist's monitor. At first, he is confused if what he is seeing is real or not, but one of his coworkers notices that something is wrong and calls him. That's when we discover that his name is actually Howard. At first, he doesn't respond, but then returns to normal and says that he's all right. Just his vision got a bit blurry for a moment. His coworker tells him to take some time off and relax, and reminds him that today, their boss would take everyone to a company dinner, which might seem great for us watching, but the protagonist thinks it is bullshit, since at the end, everyone would have to split the bill. And since he doesn't earn much money, for him it wasn't worth the trip. His coworker, noticing that Howard wouldn't want to go, probably because of the money, offers to lend him $20 so he can go. That guy is a real bruh. He says that they actually have no choice but to go, since the new director would be announced that night. And speaking of her name is Sabrina Luo. She came by the office with style, making all the men lose their shit just by looking at her. Our protagonist clearly knows that she is too much for him. Some hours later, everyone is happy at the dinner. They are all drinking and smiling when suddenly the protagonist starts having the same thing he had at the office, but this time it is way worse. His iris starts glowing, and he hears a loud buzz when suddenly his nerve system was all connected to some kind of virtual reality that only he could see. That same weird image was projected above him, while the other people near him were unable to see it. Then a robotic voice starts talking.
Of course they can't see it. The limited Universal Star makes extra effort to bring to his clients the best possible experience, helping them reach memorable improvements using virtual reality.
Right away, the protagonist gets worried, wondering what this thing has to do with him, since he never bought anything related to virtual reality. He doesn't even have money for that. And as if it could read his thoughts, the weird robot responds, "Based on big databases and calculations, you're the perfect candidate for our dream test. You'll be the test candidate for our dreamland, where you can have many life experiences. Think of that as a greater version of a VR game. In other words, isekai." Funny how when the robot says that, he shows an image of the soldier from Counter-Strike and Boruto's teacher, Shino. Howard, as a good old shithead protagonist, tells the robot to stop that because he would need to work tomorrow and didn't have time for those things. Then the robot says that this system can take a copy of any real-life person to the dreamland, and that he could decide what would happen with his life. Then the robot asks him the big question, if he wouldn't want to live his life as a different person. But before our protagonist can give an answer, the new director enters the room alongside their boss. And what a director, huh? He formally introduces her to everyone there, one by one. He introduces her to a guy that is known by everyone for constantly flattering the boss all the time and on everything he does. This guy who, by the way, is so drunk that he keeps staring at the women's boobs. The boss keeps presenting every worker to her, but simply ignores our protagonist. The woman obviously notices that and asks about him. The protagonist starts shaking trying to talk to her, and as he was about to say his name, his boss interrupts him and says that he is a nobody. His abilities are mediocre and that he basically has no communication capabilities, basically destroying the man. But we see that these are all lies, and for some reason, this fat son of a bitch just doesn't like the protagonist, because contrary to the other workers, he never tried to flatter him, and because of that, he tries to screw with the protagonist in every way he could. The woman doesn't seem to care and just greets everyone. The story follows and everyone is going home. The dinner is over and tomorrow everyone has to work again. Our protagonist Howard is a bit stressed out because he thought if he worked hard, he would be recognized at some point, but that didn't happen. His partner tries to cheer him up, saying that if he wants to grow, he doesn't have a choice but to fawn over the boss. Right after that, we see a flashback of this guy in his school years when he was one of the leaders of the students' movement against the system, the complete opposite of who he is now. The man simply sold himself to the system. After that, we see the boss trying to flirt with the with the director, saying that she doesn't need to waste her time with these insignificant workers, but she doesn't seem to care for what he's saying, just telling him that she knows what she's doing, while our protagonist overhears the conversation. The boss notices that the protagonist was listening and starts talking indirectly to him, saying that if someone hasn't realized yet what he wants to do, that person should be fired. Then something happens. Those words must have been the end of the line for Howard. He's angry because all his hard work and and dedication were worthless. Even if is outside or inside his workplace, he still suffers discrimination. That's enough for him. He was determined to leave his job tomorrow, but until then, he should calm down his anger. So he tells the robot to take a copy of the hottie, the director, and his boss to the Dreamland.
Instructions error. The system can only scan one person at Time. Base it on the request. The system determines that the target to be scanned is the Sabrina Luo.
Howard was confused.
Scanning completed. Character created.
The story follows, and the protagonist goes back to his apartment, where he asks the robot why he didn't tell him that the system could only scan one person at a time, because he wasn't prepared for that.
The system has detected a huge rise of dopamine in your brain. In conclusion, you're loving it.
Howard becomes embarrassed by having the truth thrown at his face, saying that in fact it would be cool to have an NPC of a hot woman being his servant at the game. He isn't wrong. The robot says that the Dreamland system would be activated at midnight, and until then, he should find a safe place to sleep. The protagonist says that's fine, but he's also feeling too anxious to fall asleep. The robots say that this won't be a problem, because they obviously already predicted that situation, and that the system would interfere with the activation of his ascending reticular activating system. In other words, the part of his brain responsible for his sleep, making him fall asleep. Simple as that. Then the process starts. Howard, getting more and more nervous, starts feeling everything spinning, and his heart beating faster, until suddenly he slept like a baby, just for almost immediately waking up, in a way that all of us would want to be awakened someday, with a half-naked 2D character above him, saying, "So we finally met." The woman quickly introduces herself as being the AI administrator of the Dreamland, and her name is ChatGPT. AI-63. The protagonist seems a bit confused. She explains to him about the shops and credit systems, where he can buy stuff that will be useful in the future, like a military knife costing 2 credits, and 100-ton truck that costs 40 credits, a temperature-controlling shirt and package of compressed food, and a battery with infinite energy that costs 200 points of credit. At first, we don't notice the value of these items, right? But I can assure you that each one of those things is extremely valuable for the place where he is heading to. She also explains that for every challenge he completes, he would gain some credit points and blah blah blah. The same old stuff we're already seen in others, isekai. The protagonist thanks her for the explanation and asks about the NPCs, if there is anyone that is strong for him to use. The AI then tells him that for 10,000 points she would be at his service, which the protagonist thinks is a steal. Then she warns him that the Dreamland is being activated, and if he doesn't have any other question, then shit is about to get serious right now. A portal that leads directly to the apocalyptic world appears, and when our protagonist approaches it to go to another world, so, he wakes up. He looks around, trying to see if what he just lived was real or not, then realizing he's at home and nothing changed. He was never an expert in technology, but even he should know that it is impossible to create a new world out of nothing, so he decides to just take a bath and prepare for work. After getting to his bathroom, he notices that the power is off, which is intriguing. He goes down the stairs of his apartment like normal, not noticing anything different, until he comes out of the door and notices that he is now alone, literally alone. There was no one nearby, and anywhere. He then hears a weird buzz, and as he looks up, he sees a huge plane falling above him, and believe it or not, exploding right in front of him. And you might be wondering, so he died? That's how the story ends? And well, obviously not. In fact, thanks to the Kishimoto no Jutsu, he was able to hide behind a car just in time.
The Dreamland's simulator, Apocalypse Survival, just started. What are you going to do to survive now that everyone in the world has disappeared? Difficulty level is 0. You have 180 days to survive.
Wait, did you say 180 days? But before he was able to say anything else, Howard notices a sound of liquid dropping coming from the car next to him. When he comes down to see what it was, a puddle of gasoline forms near him. Once again, using his Kishimoto no Jutsu, he was able to escape alive from a point-blank explosion while screaming, "Are you fucking kidding me?" The story goes on, and our protagonists now have recovered from the initial shock of arriving at this new world. He started to think about his situation more logically. He writes down his needs in his book, so he can have a better understanding of what would be his priorities there. 180 days might look like a lot of time, but if I can get a lot of supplies, I might be able to survive. I can use those 180 days to think about what my life will be after I resign. Maybe I can even have some fun. And that's what he did. Our protagonist went to some some clothing stores to find the best drip for the apocalypse, borrowed some jewels, drank the most expensive drinks, because at the end of the day, he was the only person in the world, right? After remembering that, he also remembered that the robot made a copy of that of his company's director. He started talking on the radio of a police car, trying to contact the server's GM, asking about the woman's copy. He heard a sound coming from behind, and instantly turns around, just to see that it was a doggy, which for him made sense, since every other human disappeared, the animals can run freely. He started thinking that the AI tricked him to play this game, and there would be no woman. He heard another animal, but this time it was nothing less than a freaking tiger. The protagonist almost pisses himself after the tiger jumped towards him, but instead of being ripped and eaten alive, he was kindly licked by the tiger. You might be wondering again, oh hey look, another Kishimoto no jutsu, but this time there's actually a good reason for that. The protagonist knew that tiger, he was actually friendly to humans. In fact, a lot of tourists used to take pictures with him. So, okay, we'll let it pass this time. 7 days have gone by since our hero started living alone in a post-apocalyptic world, and the challenge was getting even tougher than he could imagine. The water in the taps had run out, and the only way to get more was from the bottles in the market. Without power to keep the refrigerator, the meat and vegetables started to rot, and now there were worms everywhere. Our protagonist was living by eating cookies lately, but he didn't know how much time his body could keep up with the lack of vitamins. Luckily, in one of his hunts for food, he found an old restaurant that had a diesel generator inside, which in a post-apocalyptic world, my friends, is pure gold. And to get even better, there was still some consumable meat in the freezer. Considering his findings, he decided to make that restaurant his new shelter from now on. During the day, he went out trying to get most of the supplies he could. During night, he plowed land to grow some veggies, using the rotten meat as a fertilizer. And then the days went by. Day 31. Howard drove through the surrounding areas, wondering what he would do today. His coworker told him to search for a shop that sells some seeds, that it was gross to pick seeds from rotten vegetables. That was obviously an illusion created in his head, and Howard knew that. That's why he said he had a better idea, that he would take this hands off the wheel, and then it wouldn't take long before the car hit something and he would be killed. And when he wakes up, everything would be back to normal. His illusionary coworker tells Howard to cheer up, since the garlic he had planted was finally sprouting, but he responds saying that this has nothing to do with his vegetables, that the entire city is looking like a dump with flies everywhere, and when he sleeps it feels like there's worms walking through his body. During the night he can't see anything, is suffocating like the whole world has abandoned him. That's it guys, our protagonist just gone completely nuts. His coworker gives him a speech telling him to not give up, for him to wake up to reality, that he is the one playing the game, and not the game playing him. While he listens to his coworker, something jumps out in front of his car, forcing him to brake suddenly. Another car appears in front of him, and yes, it is the company's director. She crashes her car, and the airbags are deployed. The car's airbags okay, not hers. After the crash, the woman passes out. But when she wakes up, she was already in another place. She notices that someone made a band-aid on her face, and she was wearing male clothes for some reason. Then she leaves the room and notices that she's in some kind of restaurant, and there is a diesel generator on, and there was also some fresh food on the table. She keeps searching for what's going on when she finds our protagonist shaving his beard, because after 30 days completely alone, bro, with a woman like that hanging around, he might as well let everything ready for action. He says he cooked for her and invites her to eat with him. During the meal, she said that she remembered him from that company dinner, but she didn't know his name. He then introduces himself to her, noticing that this copy he brought to the game had the same memories as the real woman. She was impressed that he could make all of that by himself: electricity, food, shelter, and everything else. He thanks her and asks about her life and how she spent the last month. Then she says that suddenly everyone had vanished from the world, and that he is the only living person that she found during the whole month. He asks what she plans to do now, and she says that haven't planned anything yet. Our protagonist goes for the attack and asks the lady to live there with him, saying that if she gets sick, he can take care of her and have everything she needs right there. That was a bit of a simp move, but considering the actual state of the world they're in, is not like she had a better choice. So she accepts the offer, but warns him that he isn't her type and he shouldn't try doing anything funny. Well, for someone who, for sheer loneliness, was talking to a dummy a few days ago, that was clearly a huge win. So he says that is fine by him. She says she would not take advantage of him or anything, and they can share the work. He said it was a good idea, but she should rest for today because tomorrow they would start to work for real. Even though he doesn't show it, our protagonist had been emotionally broken by this rejection, but their relationship was just starting. Continuing the story, the day starts with Howard waking up to a loud noise, wondering what the woman could be doing at this hour. He goes to find out and sees several boxes scattered in the hallway. When he asks what she's doing, Sabrina replies that she cleaned up the restaurant's storage to turn it into her room, and if he needed her, he could ring the bell. Howard gets really upset, but that's not all. She also threw away the mannequin he had leaning there, which in the last episode we saw was his only friend, just like Winsel was for Tom Hanks. She says she's going to get it back, but he says she doesn't need to, and angrily goes after the mannequin. But before leaving, he decides to tell her that they should each do their own laundry and cook their own food. She doesn't understand, and asks why. He then says it's so they can see each other less often, and that this way she wouldn't have to be on high alert all the time to defend herself, and he wouldn't feel weird when he saw her. Man, the guy is totally tilted. She doesn't understand what's up with this guy, so he tells her that even though she's a beautiful and wealthy woman with a higher position in the company than his, in this world he wouldn't be the gentleman she expected him to be. In other words, folks, the guy went red pill because the woman threw away his mannequin. So we have a time skip of over 90 days. We are now on day 120 of the apocalypse, remembering that the protagonist needs to survive for 180 days to win. Apparently, in these 3 months that have passed, some things have changed in the city. The weather started to get colder, and the horrible smell disappeared. Sabrina filled the place with flower pots, which greatly improved the atmosphere. But despite everything, they don't talk much since that first fight. And even though she seems fine not talking for 3 months, he's not fine at all. He frequently talks to the mannequin Donald, his only friend in this apocalypse. He tells the mannequin that today they would go looking for meat, asking if he preferred spoiled meat from the market or rat meat. Thankfully, he decides they'll go fishing, but before that, they'll make a quick stop at the zoo to visit none other than Dummy, the tiger. Dummy had been feeding on other zoo animals and some meat the protagonist brought him from time to time. Suddenly, the tiger's spider sensor activates, and he dashes out of nowhere. He saw nothing less than a servant, guys, and went straight for it. The detail is that the zoo's servants don't have horns, so these were wild servants. Nature was already encroaching on civilization, much like in The Last of Us. While the protagonist was realizing this, the weather started to suddenly change. The atmosphere turned eerie all of a sudden. Even thunder was rumbling. A powerful wind arrived, and then he realized it was a typhoon. He rushed into the car without understanding anything. How could such a huge typhoon suddenly appear on a sunny day? Then he remembered that all of this was a simulation, a game, and this typhoon was probably just another challenge in the game. The problem was that Sabrina goes cycling up the mountain every day, and given the time, she should be reaching the mountain top at that moment. So, not to lose the only woman left on the face of the earth, the protagonist raced back to his shelter with the car. Even though they weren't talking, he couldn't let anything happen to her, otherwise he would be completely alone again. Arriving there, he sees the door open, which he imagines means she hasn't returned home yet, so he heads as quickly as possible towards the mountain she usually climbs. The weather continued dreadful. Rain, wind, lightning everywhere, until he finally sees her. There she was, leaning against a post. Something had apparently happened. Her leg had a huge cut. But then Howard, our protagonist Chad, picks her up in his arms and takes her back to safety. They were apparently safe in a mansion at the top of the mountain that Sabrina used to visit. The woman continued to be soaked and trembling. He asks to take a look at her wounds, but she doesn't allow it. He says it's not the time to act tough. If she gets an infection, she could die. But she continues to refuse, saying she knows how to take care of herself. It's incredible how even being the only 2 people on Earth in an emergency situation, these 2 still don't get along. The protag says he has a plan. Since they don't know how long this typhoon will last, and the shelter they live in will likely be completely flooded, he suggests they make this mansion their new shelter. She simply agrees and asks how they should go about it. He says that since she's injured, there's not much he can do to help, so she should just stay there and wait. Then the protag, who in one scene is a huge Chad, in the next becomes a lone calf caught in a storm, while the woman just waits, and the weather kept getting worse to the point where it started to snow. Arriving at the shelter, he sees that everything was already flooded, and unfortunately, even their generator had given up. He decides to grab as much food as he can until a rush of water and wind knocks down the vegetables they had harvested. He decides to grab whatever he can and make a run for it. Their situation was not good at all. The food they had would last a maximum of 2 days. It was impossible to fish in that gale. Seeing himself in a dead end, he finds himself having to resort to something he had never imagined. He arrives at the zoo, and there is Dummy, the tiger, all injured, apparently having been in a fight. The protag's plan was to use the tiger's hunting skills hills to get food, but as soon as he sees the animal's condition, the young man tries to get him into the car to tend to his wounds, but the tiger doesn't even flinch. Howard shouts, trying to convince the tiger to follow him, but the tiger roars back, indicating that he'll do as he pleases. The protag tells himself that this is just a game, and he shouldn't get so involved. So he turns around and leaves, leaving the tiger there, in a very sad scene. Back at the house on the mountaintop, the protag sees Sabrina sprawled on the sidewalk. He asks what happened, and she says she wanted to collect rainwater to boil for them, but ended up falling and can't get up. So our hero does the good deed of carrying her inside, presenting us with this beautiful scene. The guy, in an ultra-chad red pill frenzy, slapped the hottie so hard she even moaned, saying that from now on, he would be the one making decisions there. Then he threw her on the bed and said he was going to get a first aid kit. After cleaning the brunette's wound, she asked what he planned to do. He said he once saw a herd of deer, and tomorrow he would try to hunt. She reminds him that wild deer always remember the smell that represents danger to them and stay extremely alert to it. He says it doesn't matter because, either way, he has weapons. Speaking of weapons, he shows her a pistol he found under her pillow when he went to get the vital supplies from their old shelter. He says he left the bullets in it and hands the gun back to the woman. She asks if he doesn't want to keep the gun. He says no, and hopes that this gesture might erase her prejudice against him. And so they say goodbye, because he needs to prepare for the hunt the next day. And in this vibe, day 121 of the apocalypse arrives. It's snowing outside, so our protag bundles up and prepares to go hunting. He thinks to himself that he doesn't even know how to kill a chicken, let alone a deer. But as he pondered these things, a freaking pack of hungry wolves was lurking. Our protag sets out on the hunt, the freezing cold making his breath turn into vapor, and all that could be heard was the wind and his footsteps in the snow, until he seemed to have heard something, so he quickly turns and takes a position. When he was ready to shoot, there was nothing there. He had lost count of how many times this had happened. He could hear them. They must be close by. It's as if they know every move he makes. Maybe Sabrina was right. The deer can recognize his scent. Tired of wasting energy, he decides to try using the fishing net. The problem is, a sinister storm just happened, and in this situation, the river's current becomes very strong. The protag doesn't care and casts the net anyway. Screw it. Now it's just praying it works out. But immediately he feels a tug on the net, and before he could think of anything, he is literally pulled into the river, and man, imagine how cold that is. As soon as he emerges from the water, he doesn't even want to fish anymore and just thinks about going back home and warming up by the fire. But it's at this moment that he sees what he came looking for, a deer. He quickly hides so the deer doesn't see him and starts looking for the gun until he pulls a shotgun from his bag. Then there's no mistake, just aim and shoot. So the protag takes a deep breath and... he missed. Damn, what a dumbass. The recoil from the shotgun was so strong that it hit him hard in the nose, making it bleed, man. This protag is really clueless. He wasted a ton of resources, fell into freezing water, hurt himself, and now, guess what? Of course, the wolves. Luckily, this fool still had the shotgun, so he had a chance to stay alive. But the wolves, unlike our protag, are not at all dumb. They realize that this guy is injured and don't even try their luck. They just bolt. The protag didn't quite understand, but in the mess he was in, he should be grateful for that. Well, back at the mansion on top of the mountain, the protag arrives home, and hey, the brunette was waiting for him, naked, wrapped in a blanket, warming herself by the fire. Finally, something was going right for this guy. He doesn't think twice and starts undressing as quickly as he can. But the guy had just literally fallen into a river in the snow, so all he really wanted was to warm up by the fire. The brunette is initially shy, but soon takes a peek and ends up seeing a photo in the protag's wallet of another woman who also had a well-endowed bust. She asks about this photo, while by now he's naked around the fire. He says she's an ex-girlfriend, she says she's cute, and asks why they broke up. He says he wanted a family, but she wasn't ready for that. Then he asks about her, if she's dating someone. And unfortunately, folks, she says yes. The name of the cuckold, I mean the guy, is Lawrence. She says he has a PhD from MIT, and that he is the CEO of a technology company. So the guy is a big shot. The protagonist takes the opportunity to throw a jab, saying that the guy might be successful but lacks good taste in women because it's pure torture to live with a woman like her. The brunette doesn't take it lightly and yells at him, but in the heat of the moment, she forgets that the guy is naked there and ends up seeing him with his pistol out. On impulse to cover her eyes, she drops the blanket and her melons are exposed, much to our joy, and especially to the protagonist, who even starts bleeding from the nose. The woman is extremely embarrassed and throws things at him, yelling for him to leave immediately, which he does, is, but still with the beautiful image of her melons in his mind. But regardless, having an erection doesn't help you resist the mood and hunger, does it? So the next day comes, and our hero continues in his attempt to hunt a deer, although all he manages to do is just see a mere shadow of them. Every time he gets close, they disappear. Not to mention, in real life, he had never even touched a gun before. So, well, you can understand why he acted like a fool earlier. Nevertheless, he keeps trying, but there are no results. The good side of all this is that at least now the brunette is talking to him more frequently, and she doesn't complain when he comes home empty-handed. For some reason, she seems to be getting weaker, which is not good at all. Her injuries don't seem to be improving. Even though their bellies had not been full for a long time, the protagonist still held on to hope that things would get better tomorrow. He mentions setting up a trap, a pit with sharp wooden stakes at the bottom, covered with some cabbage leaves. His hope is that, being winter, the wolves won't resist the temptation of the leaves. Sabrina says he should have discussed this with her. After all, it's very risky to do so much manual work in this situation. The protagonist says he's at his limit. He doesn't have the strength to set up another trap like that. In other words, he's gone all in. Tomorrow, they either survive or they don't. So the next day, arriving at the spot where the trap was set, he sees it didn't work. Wait, actually no, there's blood. The animal just escaped from there. So he immediately follows this blood trail, praying that the animal has died. Finally, he reaches a clearing where he sees two wolves devouring the flesh of an animal, the animal that was probably going to be their food. Realizing it was now do or die, he pulls out his gun, and in a frenzy of hunger, fear, and anger, he fires at the animals. Obviously, he misses all shots, and the animals just flee, taking the pieces of the dead deer with them. Realizing that his last hope of not starving to death had disappeared before his eyes, our protag falls to his knees in the snow. He tries to tell himself that it's just a game, that he should control his emotions, but the truth is that the frustration of failing was too much. He screams with all his might, a cry of desperation of someone who has reached their limit. And so we arrive at day 126 of the apocalypse. All they have left to eat is literally a tomato and a cabbage leaf. Sabrina says he can eat. After all, she hasn't helped at all lately. Howard says they're both dying. She doesn't need to be so proud. She silently agrees. Then she tells how until she turned 18, she was just a puppet manipulated by others, mainly by her father, who was a very authoritarian man and used to keep her locked in her room most of the time, unable to go out and play with other children. The guy was so awful that he wouldn't even let her draw. Man, he said she was different from the other siblings, and that sooner or later she would abandon the family like her mother did. The guy had a serious emotional problem and took it all out on her, saying that she could only bring honor to the family by obeying him, and that without their family's power, she was nothing. That explains why she wants to be so independent nowadays. It's the way she found to deal with that trauma. Howard says he understands her, and that they both had a crappy life. He tells her that he always tried really hard in everything he did, but was never rewarded for it. Always lived a mediocre life without being recognized by anyone. She asks if he has any kind of strength that could make him stand out. He says that if he has any strength, it's never giving up once he decides to do something. He's watched a lot of Naruto. That's his ninja way. She asks if he fought for what he wanted because the world is full of people who work hard, and the only way to be recognized is to shine brighter than others. Then she says her purpose is to be independent, and he'll know his when he really strives for something. He asks if helping her survive will earn him her recognition. He says all he ever wanted was to hear once from someone that he mattered. Sabrina asks how she can prove she's independent by letting him help, but the reality is they're almost starving, so she lets go of her pride and accepts. The main character then takes the cabbage leaf and leaves the room all wobbly, practically too weak to do anything. Before leaving, he says that if he doesn't come back home after 3 days, it's probably because he's dead, and she'll find his body in a stream east of the mansion. And if that happens, she'll do the right thing, so he leaves her alone and scared. Oh man, I hope he's not talking about cannibalism. Outside the mansion, Howard talked to Donald, the mannequin who had long been his only friend in this apocalyptic world. He tells him that he never really fought for anything because he never had the courage to pursue something. Instead, he just kept complaining about everything. He acknowledges that he did this to shift the blame to others or the world for not being able to take his own responsibilities. He always took the easy way out to avoid unpleasant environments and difficult choices. He says he could have handled many things better with his family, his ex-girlfriend, in his studies, and even in his current situation. But in the end, he would just shrink into a safe corner where he could lament about things, like a big crybaby. Our protagonist tells Donald, the mannequin, that he will stop whining and never do it again. He then pushes him off the mansion balcony, symbolizing the death of who he used to be. The story continues, and we see a feminine hand picking up a cleaver in a kitchen. It's Sabrina, standing over a fallen body, Howard's lifeless body. She raises the cleaver, and as she strikes, she wakes up. It was a dream. She was so shocked by what Howard had said to her before he left that she literally dreamed about it. Interestingly, if we stop to think about it, because remember folks, they're living in a post-apocalyptic world created within their minds as a dream. The project's name is literally the Dreamland. They shouldn't be able to dream in that world, so the fact that she had a dream inside is really relevant. But anyway, let's go to day 127 of the apocalypse. We see Howard shoveling snow and walking breathlessly to the edge of the river he fell into the other day. He remembers that when he fell into the river, it was the only time he managed to get close to a deer. The other times, they always managed to escape without him having a chance to get close, meaning the water covered his scent. Realizing this, he has an idea, which is more like a gamble, but in the current situation, it's the only chance he has to survive. Then we see Sabrina trying her best to stay awake because she is afraid to sleep and dream about it again. Due to hunger and lack of sleep, she begins to have hallucinations of her father, telling her she is pathetic and that she wouldn't be in this situation if she had followed the path he laid out for her. She shouts at him to disappear, which works momentarily, then grabs the tomato, which is literally the only thing she has to eat, and remembers Howard's words and the deal they made. This gives her the motivation she needs to keep fighting and prove she can survive on her own. A few hours pass, and we see her struggling to stay awake until she hears a strange sound and realizes there's a darn rat trying to eat her tomato, but she doesn't have the energy to do anything but watch. Her father appears again, laughing at her and her weakness. He talks about the choices she made, trying to prove she was independent instead of following the path he chose for her. Then we see that Lawrence, her supposed husband, is actually an old limp. Yes, he's rich as hell, but he's almost dying, and all she had to do was stay with him, and once he was dead, she would inherit everything. In other words, even her marriage was arranged by her father. He says that if she can't even endure a little pain, how could she fend for herself? He says she wasn't made to be a strong woman. She's just trying to act like one, but in reality, she's just a fragile and pathetic woman who will end up being devoured by rats. Oh man, this story is getting heavy. Then we see a deer in the snow, calmly eating a leaf of kale. The scene shifts back to Sabrina, and she's holding a gun, the one the protagonist gave her in the last video. She says she doesn't need to be saved by him, didn't need anyone to save her life. We see the reflection of her gun in the rat's eye, and at the same time, the reflection of a shotgun in the deer's eye. Yes, this was Howard's bet. He buried himself in the snow and waited until a deer fell into his trap, and the moment had arrived. So at the same time he fires his shotgun at the deer, Sabrina shoots at the rat stealing her food, and that's how the chapter ends. The next chapter begins with the deer's body lying in the snow, and from within the snow, we see our protagonist emerging with an ultra Chad Sigma look. When he sees that his plan worked, he starts laughing and shouts in celebration of his victory. Then we see Sabrina eating her tomato, and not only that, she's roasting the rat she killed. Yeah, it's the apocalypse, it's like that. Then someone enters the room. It's Howard, bringing with him the deer he hunted. She's speechless when she sees that he succeeded, but the guy has been without food and probably freezing for a while now, so he loses his strength and collapses on the floor. She immediately gets up to help him and sees that there's even ice encrusted on his clothes, meaning he suffered to get this deer. A few hours pass, and we see that Sabrina has already cut the deer's meat and is heating water in a tub to put Howard in to see if he recovers. She asks if he's feeling better, but there's no response until he grabs her arm and she startles. He calls her with a weak voice, and she approaches. He asks if he's earned her recognition. She's surprised but says yes, that he's amazing, so he becomes happy, finally being recognized by someone. Sometime later, a deer meat soup is ready. Sabrina calls our protagonist to eat, but he doesn't respond. He still seems very unwell. She recognizes this and decides to do something. Then she opens his mouth to feed him, but not in the way we imagined. She literally passes the food from her mouth to his mouth, like feeding a baby bird. I don't know if I find this gross or cute, to be honest. Hours pass, and our protagonist is still in bed, shivering from the cold. She puts 3 blankets over him, but realizes that this probably won't be enough. So she looks at our protagonist, bites her lip, and does what you're thinking. She starts undressing to lie down with our protagonist and warm him with her body heat. Then she lies down with him and says that everything will be okay. Day 130 of the apocalypse begins, and Howard, our protagonist, wakes up. However, unlike all the other days so far, this time he's not alone. He looks to the side and sees Sabrina sleeping next to him in a cuddling position. This immediately shocks him, especially when he realizes she's completely naked. She notices he's awake, and as she begins to leave, he holds her, mentioning that he still feels a bit unwell. Then she starts talking about his ex-girlfriend, telling him to tell her again why they broke up. He says she thought they were too young to have something more serious. She asks for the other reason, and he says it's because he wanted a family. Then she says she does too. He doesn't quite understand. After all, she wanted to prove to everyone that she was an independent woman. She says she's already doing that. The fact that she is successful is not proof of anything. It's just a goal she set for herself to try to break those limitations. But in the end, she didn't care about anything more than that. It's like she escaped from one prison to fall into another. How could she say she's independent when she spent the whole day unable to make a decision alone? The protagonist is at a loss for words. After all, he never even set a goal in his life. Then she asks if he doesn't want to have a family with her. Man, how do you say no in a situation like this? The protagonist takes a moment to respond, making her think she was too hasty. Then he takes her hand and says that this is exactly what he wanted. After all, working so hard to try to be recognized by others ended up keeping him from having a family. She tells him that they will survive together, and he says yes, and that now having a family is his motivation. And then, folks, they finally kiss. And we have a good amount of scenes of that I will have to censor because, you know, we have kids watching. Until in the final climax of the act, Sabrina remembers when she was a teenager and her father literally tied her arms and legs and covered her mouth, saying it was time to introduce her to the world of adults, and then calls a man and a woman to enter her room, tell them to take off their clothes and do what you are thinking about on the couch. Sabrina turns her face away to avoid watching, but her father holds her head and forces her to watch, saying that she needs to learn how to give pleasure to that old man she was going to marry. Man, that guy is messed up, seriously. Then he says something that left me confused, mentions that it's better if they both look like a real father and daughter, and for that, he would change her name. From then on, she would be called Sabrina Luo. What I didn't understand is whether she started living with him after her mother left or something like that. Maybe this will be explained better in the future anyway. After they finish their act of love, we have a time skip of 1 month. We're on day 160 of the apocalypse, reminding you that the main character has to survive 180 days in this post-apocalyptic world. He and Sabrina have been living as a couple since then. The main character wasn't fully recovered from his near-death experience, but at least he could work. The deer meat had run out, but he was managing to catch some fish in that river. Furthermore, they started working on a vegetable greenhouse, and Sabrina was putting in a lot of effort. Speaking of her, she calls our main character and says she has a gift for him. He gets all excited, thinking it's something naughty, but we soon find out that no, she made him a deerskin poncho, which was extremely useful when hunting deer. The tables have turned for our main character, folks. Returning home after the hunt, he sees the lamppost where he found Sabrina in the storm weeks ago, so he decides to visit the places where they spent the early days of the apocalypse. He goes to the old restaurant, remembers Donald, his mannequin friend, passes by the place where the plane exploded in front of him on his first day of the apocalypse, and then decides to go to the zoo to see how his tiger friend was doing. He calls for Dummy, a whole deer leg in his hand to offer, until he hears a loud roar, and even with his leg badly injured, he starts running towards the sound. When he gets there, he sees his friend being attacked by a pack of wolves. He grabs his shotgun, and the wolves instantly notice his presence. But before they could do anything, he pulls the trigger, injuring and scaring them off. He turns to Dummy, telling him it was okay now, but then realizes he was too late. His friend was badly injured, only emitting a weak purring. Howard touches him, trying to calm the trembling animal. Memories of their time together flood his mind. Dummy was a good creature. The main character apologizes for not arriving in time. Then the tiger looks him in the eyes, as if understanding what he was saying. Howard says that soon he wouldn't feel pain anymore, then aims his shotgun at his friend's head, saying he would miss him and would avenge him. The tiger understands that his end has come. A tear runs down Howard's face at the moment he pulls the trigger. And so ends the life of Dummy, the tiger. My friends, nature is tough. The story continues, and we find Howard in a bathtub with Sabrina. She notices that he seems a bit down and asks if something has happened. He says that nothing happened, but it's getting colder every day, and the world outside is becoming increasingly perilous. He asks if she could stay home for the next few days. Not that he's trying to confine her or anything. He's just worried. She says it's not a problem, especially since she has a lot of work to do in their greenhouse. So, in that romantic atmosphere, they start getting affectionate again. But as the saying goes, my friends, a protagonist's joy is short-lived, and soon he has to go hunting again. Now he's an Ultra Chad Sigma, not only wearing a deerskin outfit to disguise his scent, but also having learned to handle the shotgun and a military knife properly. The guy has become a killing machine, but just like him, the wolves have been hunting deer to survive. We see a pack chasing a group of deer, one of the wolves leaping onto a surrounded deer, its extremely sharp fangs ready to tear the animal apart in a deadly attack. The wolves know how to survive too. Then they hear something. Could a deer have been left behind? The wolf goes after the potential easy prey, but this was the trap. The animal lets out cries of pain, but it's too late. Howard, the ultimate Chad, stands before him, lifting his knife and ending the animal's life with a single strike. Once again, another animal. Sabrina calls out to him, but he doesn't even notice until another attempt, and he snaps out of his trance. She tells him that he's been very absent lately, and asks him to tell her what the problem is so she can help. He says it's nothing serious and tells her to go back to sleep. Sabrina doesn't know what to say to Howard, who soon returns to his trance. All that's in his mind at this moment are the wolves. He needs to rid his family of this threat. The pack of 4 wolves was now reduced to 3 after their last encounter with the protagonist. They split up upon hearing a strange sound, and Howard was in the vicinity. One of the wolves approaches a bush that it senses is amiss. It sniffs an odd yet strangely familiar scent emanating from it. Suddenly another wolf emerges from within the bush, or so it seemed. The little wolf runs towards it, but before it can realize, the barrel of a shotgun is shoved into its mouth, the barrel emerging from within the bush. A point-blank shot explodes the poor animal's head. The remaining 2 wolves hear everything and quickly spot him. Our protagonist, Howard, the Ultra, Master, Sigma Chad, Red Pill. The 2 remaining wolves stare directly at him, and what he sees is a murderous expression, one of pure hatred. Day 170 of the apocalypse. Only 10 days of the game remain, but our protagonist doesn't seem to dwell on that much. In fact, all that's in his mind at this moment are those accursed wolves. That murderous gaze has truly stuck in his head, and he'll only find peace again once he's dealt with the remaining 2 wolves. Sabrina calls for him, mentioning that today they'll have steamed fish and roast meat. She believes she has improved a lot in the kitchen and prepared this special lunch for him, but the protagonist couldn't care less. He says he'll just grab some dried meat and go on a trip for a few days, leaving Sabrina frustrated. She says that in the past few days, he always leaves early and returns late, asking what's keeping him so busy that they can't even eat together. Howard says there are some things he needs to finish to be at ease, and walks past her, displaying no emotions as a Sigma would. She implores, tears welling up in her eyes, for him to at least tell her what's wrong. He thinks that if he tells her about the wolves, with her proud nature, she'll surely want to do something about it. So he simply says, it's nothing serious, leaving Sabrina heartbroken. Day 173. Sabrina wakes up to the sound of hammering, realizing that the windows of her room have been completely boarded up. The protagonist was outside nailing everything shut. He explains that it's because it's getting colder, and he wanted to reinforce the windows. She tells him she didn't ask for his help. He immediately cuts her off, saying he's not in the mood for jokes. She insists she's serious. He's been acting strangely, not telling her anything. It's like they've reverted to how they were at the beginning. He claims she's mistaken, but she persists. She says they rushed into a relationship and asks if he had thought of all this as a one-night stand. He denies it, stating that everything he's been doing is to protect this house. Then she explodes and tells him to finally reveal what's going on. If he truly wants to protect this house, he needs to show her some respect at least. The protagonist is left speechless for a while until he too explodes. He says they agreed that she would stay home while he looked for food, and she couldn't help him with what he was about to do. Finally, he says that he'll tell her everything when he's done. Sabrina is disappointed, turns her back on him and walks away. The protagonist, like a true emotionless Sigma, ignores everything that happened and simply thinks that he's out of nails and needs to go to the hardware store to get more. The only thing occupying his thoughts are the 2 wolves and how they've made a fool of him. The snow has been increasing, and soon their tracks will disappear. The temperature has also dropped to nearly minus 30 degrees, and it's only going to get worse. He needs to take a break from these hunts. His real concern now is how to keep them warm. He'll have to deal with the wolf issue when the snow stops. Arriving at the tool store, he notices that it looks well maintained, and he'll probably find everything he needs there. So, he begins searching for the things he needs until he stumbles upon a book. When he looks, he sees that it's a diesel generator maintenance manual. Well, who would have thought, my friends? Immediately, he starts flipping through the book and realizes that he can fix the generator left at their old shelter with this. But as he contemplates this, the store's television turns on by itself, displaying a lot of static on the screen. The protagonist jumps in surprise, and then she appears, the artificial intelligence simulation administrator. He looks at her, but at first he's not quite aware. It's only after a few seconds that he remembers he's living in a dream. He had completely forgotten about it. The AI tells him she just came to warn him that the simulation will end in a week, and that he should start preparing to return. Howard is in shock because going back to his old life was something that hadn't even crossed his mind anymore. The scene shifts to Sabrina writing a note to Howard. The note says they need some time apart, that she's going somewhere else, and he shouldn't come after her. Then she turns and leaves. Back to the protagonist. With the TV the AI had appeared on broken on the floor, he gathers all the things he needs and is ready to leave when suddenly sounds of paws emerge. Then Howard sees it. The wolves had followed his trail to that place. He shows no fear and says he he understands the wolves' anger. After all, he killed their family. He tries to run to where his weapon is, but the wolves are faster and won't let him do that. He's amazed by the intelligence of the animals, then realizes that right to his left, the exit door is open. He sees this is his only chance and bolts out of the store with the wolves close behind. His car is a few meters away. He runs straight towards it, but his leg that had been bothering him since the day he fell in the river starts to hurt again, and he weakens. This is all the wolves needed to jump on him and knock him into the snow. The bigger wolf violently bites his head, while the smaller one bites his leg. Howard, feeling excruciating pain, immediately starts unbuttoning his deerskin coat, managing to free himself from the bigger wolf's bite. He takes the opportunity to punch the smaller wolf, biting his leg. Quickly, he pulls out his knife and strikes the animal. Meanwhile, the larger wolf, bloodthirsty, comes to bite him in the back, a violent bite that tore a chunk out of his back. Howard stabs the wolf's eye, but his knife breaks with this strike. Now things have turned worse for him. The wolf lunges again with bestial fury, but our protagonist manages to stop it with his legs and throws the animal away before it can bite his face. Then he advances toward the creature with his broken knife, delivering a blow right into the wolf's other eye, which lets out a horrific scream of pain while attacking Howard's face with its claws. Then the protagonist raises the hilt of his knife and strikes the wolf's head with all his might. The frenzy of battle is such that he continues to strike the animal in an uncontrolled rage, until a final blow dislocates his shoulder, and he releases the hilt of his knife into the snow, leaving the animal seemingly dead. He grabs his bag to get away from there as quickly as possible, but behind him, we see that the battle was not yet over. We see a flashback of Howard asking the artificial intelligence if this world would continue to exist after he returned to his reality, asking if Sabrina would live alone there. He says he can't leave her behind and wants to stay there. Back to the present, we see the wolf all battered but still thirsting for revenge, using its last strength to bite our protagonist's hand, who simply remains standing, looking at the animal. He says he admires its willpower but can't give it the revenge it desires, because he needs to protect Sabrina, no matter what happens. He then pulls his arm from the animal's mouth, tearing his skin. He manages to open the car and toss the bag with the generator repair equipment inside, but at that moment, he feels an excruciating pain. Not just one, but both wolves were biting his legs. Man, these creatures are immortal. Howard tells himself he can't die, not now, so he opens the trunk, from where a pistol falls. It was Sabrina's weapon. With no time to think, he turns to the animals devouring his leg and fires, making them release him and run away. Howard quickly closes the car door, so the wolves couldn't attack him anymore. His whole body trembles from the adrenaline of the fight. He tells himself again that he needs to fix the generator at all costs. This way, there's a great chance Sabrina will survive after he leaves from there. He tries to start the car and nothing happens. Tries again, and nothing. Apparently, the oil tank had frozen due to the minus 30-degree cold. He would need to warm the car for it to start working again, but there was no more time. He was very weak. Outside, the wolves continued to lurk. Howard had no more strength to carry on. He was losing consciousness. Then he wakes up. He was safe and sound, with Sabrina by his side. She says she found him unconscious with the broken car and brought him back in her car. He said he thought he had died, and she says she thought the same thing when she saw him. He asks if she saw anything near him when she found him, and she says he was holding a bag, which she brought back home. When he remembers the bag, he immediately tries to get up and tells her that with that, he can fix the generator. She says he is still very hurt and needs to rest a bit more before doing that, but he says no, he needs to do this. This is the last item on his to-do list. She says, okay, already accepting the fact that the protagonist doesn't listen to anything she says anyway, and he just remains silent. The story continues, and we see Howard in the garage fixing the generator, and voila, we have electricity. Yeah, science. The protagonist almost cries when he sees that all his effort was worth it. He shouts to Sabrina, asking if she sees this, and from inside, she says he's an idiot, all happy with his achievement. Howard walks back home when he sees something, the car Sabrina used to bring him back. He sees that the airbag was deployed, and the front of the car was completely dented, plus there was blood on the bumper. Looking more closely, he finds a wolf's canine tooth stuck in one of the tires, and then it becomes clear what happened, right guys? The protagonist had depleted all the wolves' HP, and Sabrina arrived to claim the kills. After imagining the scene that probably happened, Howard tries to get up but has a blackout. His vision blurs, and he almost loses consciousness. The injuries he suffered in his fight against the wolves are very deep. He'll end up dying if he he's not treated by a doctor soon. Continuing his investigation, he supposes that the dent in the car's bumper was probably caused by hitting a tree, and as we see in a flashback, Sabrina literally flattened the last remaining wolf against a pole. Damn man, that woman is fierce. So our protagonist finally acknowledges his companion's actions. Returning inside the mansion, he sees 2 wolf skins hanging to dry. Sabrina was cutting meat in the kitchen when Howard arrives and hugs her from behind, thanking her for everything she did for him. She asks when he became so mushy after all. Wasn't he the Sigma red pill? He tells her not to be so petty and asks her to forgive him. Sabrina simply asks if he has ever tasted wolf meat. He says no, so she says they will today. Howard tells her to cook a lot because they will have a lot of work to do in bed today. Yeah, he likes it. Day 178. Just 2 days left until the end of the apocalypse, folks. The city was completely frozen, literally. But for the first time in days, the sun had risen. Sabrina sees this through the bedroom window and tells Howard, who's still lying down. He doesn't respond, so she asks what's wrong with him, and the guy is really worn out, folks. She asks if he has a cold and goes to get medicine for him. The main character calls her with a very weak voice and tells her not to worry because it's not a cold. She gets tense but tries to lighten the mood by saying he's just joking and that he'll be fine soon. She mentions that he has been through very difficult situations, like moving house in a storm, hunting in a blizzard, and fixing the power generator. Thanks to him, they had electricity again. She says it's absurd that someone like him doesn't receive recognition as a boss, and that if they were still in the company, she would nominate him as the best employee of the quarter. Then Howard says, "Thank you, my boss and lovely wife." Sabrina says she hasn't agreed to marry him yet, and tells him to take the medicine all at once. The main character struggles to grab the glass, but his vision blurs. He has a black ceiling again. Sabrina asks if he's okay, but the glass falls to the floor and shatters into 1,000 pieces. Howard wakes up to this beautiful sight before him. Sabrina was only in her underwear, waiting for him to wake up. She tells him that she figured out his trick. He was just pretending to be sick so that she would worry about him, saying that this time she won't punish him. But if he continues this, she can't guarantee anything. Then she asks if he wouldn't like to, close your eyes, kids, try a new position. The main character kills the mood instantly and tells her to get up because they need to talk. Sabrina is shocked because she can't believe he doesn't want to do that with her, asks what kind of man he is, and then screams, trying to get him up. She cries, realizing that her efforts to make him better are not working. He says he doesn't have much time to say this, but he knows he's dying. Then he says the gas can last about 3 months, and when it runs out, she should go north because there's a huge reserve there. He tells her about the vegetable seeds for her to plant, that he labeled all of them with their correct names. He asks if she knows how to operate the diesel generator and says that when she moves, she should choose a house that protects from the cold, not just for its beauty. Day 180 of the apocalypse. We have finally reached the last day, my friends. We see our main character all disheveled, weak, injured, in a wheelchair looking out at the view from the mansion balcony with Sabrina. She says that today is warmer than yesterday, and that soon the temperature will go back above 0. She says that when the snow melts, she'll head north to try to find other survivors. Howard then asks Sabrina if she ever loved him. She looks at him with an expression that indicates she knows she's about to say something that will hurt him, and then she says no. Howard smiles because that means he could leave without any worries. He tells himself that it was time to wake up from this dream, and then closes his eyes for the last time. Sabrina continues talking, saying that he is a man who is full of himself and never takes others' feelings into consideration. Why would she love him? She says he has no good qualities, that when she was sad, he never said anything good to cheer her up, that he did everything on his own. She simply breaks down and starts crying over his body, calling him an idiot. But this time, Howard could no longer hear. His consciousness was no longer there. Howard finally returns from the post-apocalyptic world. The artificial intelligence was waiting for him on the other side of the portal and congratulates him on completing the challenge. Howard slowly comes to himself and asks what happened. He feels like he's lived through many experiences. Yes, clan, the protagonist has returned to being the same goofball from the beginning of the story. The AI says that it's normal for him not to precisely remember what happened there, because the system disturbs his memory so that he doesn't confuse real life with a dream. But within within a month, he will gradually remember the entire dream, and that when he regains peace in his heart, it will be much easier to accept the dream as something that really happened. Howard says he remembers something. He had told himself millions of times that he couldn't forget something important, and when he thinks about it, he becomes very sad instantly, crying. He asks if the dream world will continue to exist. The AI says it was just a game, that it's over now. No matter how many memories he has, he needs to remember that it was just a dream, nothing more than that, and that he had a real life to live. He agrees, and says that asking this question was the only thing from the dream he remembers. Everything had become a blur in his memory. Then the robot says it's time to calculate the scores and points its wand or whatever that is towards the portal, where we see the final scores of the game. The difficulty level surprisingly was 0. The grade for our protagonist was a B, and the credits earned were 50. Man, the guy almost died in a 0 difficulty game. Imagine how it's going to be from now on. Howard asks what the evaluation criteria are for him to have gotten a B, so the robot explains that what will determine his final score are the survival chances of the person left in the world. For example, if he were the only survivor, he would have scored a D. Killing the animals that threatened their lives and being able to generate electrical energy are things that increase the survival chances of his partner, so he receives a higher score. But if he had managed to get all the necessary equipment, abundant food, and built a transmission station that they could use to find other survivors, or even tame wild animals for their own benefit, he would have scored an S grade. Howard says he's just a regular person, not some Bear Grylls of professional survival. But the robot explains to him that the essence of any game is to obtain exciting experiences that one cannot have in real life, and that this apocalypse survival challenge he played was just a level 0 challenge for new players, like a tutorial, and that the real challenge of the game would be released within a month. Then she points to another portal labeled Frankenstein Invasion, where there's a freaking creepy alien and a countdown. She says the same criteria apply to all challenges, and that the intention of this game is to elevate the player's sense of justice in real-life scenarios. After all, humans are a team with a common destiny. Howard says he needs to think about whether he'll continue this game or not, because from the blurred memories he has now, he feels terrible, and it's very exhausting. So the robot, very quickly, says that it wasn't always terrible after all. He had some really happy days, especially when he was in bed, and then she displays scenes of him with Sabrina naked, in the act of love. He goes into shock at that moment, not understanding anything, and starts yelling at the robot that this is wrong, she should respect his privacy and so on. But the robot just tells him to relax because she's an emotionless artificial intelligence. She won't affect the player. He asks if Sabrina can have these memories in real life, and the robot says no. What happens in the virtual world stays in the virtual world. But at this moment, we see none other than Sabrina, the real Sabrina from the real world, waking up with tears in her eyes. The story continues with Howard saying that there's something wrong in this game. They can't be a real company. He expresses his desire to go back home. The AI responds that he just needs to rub his left eye to activate the system menu, but as he successfully completed the challenge, he's entitled to a reward. Howard tells her to send the reward to his address, but she simply ignores him and then waves her staff or whatever that thing is, and a dark mist begins to surround them. Howard is bewildered, but she tells him not to panic, as the system was deciding on the right reward for him. The protag remains in the middle of the mist, not understanding anything, until a pair of killeries appear behind him, and he remembers that he had fought against wolves. The memories of the deadly combat flash before his eyes, more vivid than ever. Then he sees someone approaching, a caveman holding a spear, who prepares and throws the spear with all his strength, killing the wolf instantly. Then Howard receives his reward, a hunting skill, precise throw. He doesn't quite understand how this skill works, but when he's about to ask the AI, he hears an alarm clock sound. It's his phone waking him up for work. So, folks, the guy spent 6 months inside a virtual reality of a post-apocalyptic world, having to hunt to survive, and when he returns, he has to go to work, as if nothing had happened. Howard realizes that the system somehow forced him awake, because he hadn't selected the option to exit the game. When he rubs his left eye to try to open the system again, Nothing happens. This leaves him more confused than ever, not sure if he's dreaming or in the real world. Meanwhile, in the dream world, the artificial intelligence is also baffled and asks the other AI in the system why our protag was suddenly kicked out of the game.
Alert, alert, system failure, memory control function deactivated.
The AI doesn't understand and asks the other AI to track the error code.
Error code is Z001, loading new information.
Then we see Sabrina at the moment she's having that dream inside the game. The AI is in turmoil, trying to understand how there's a new dream within a dream. She tells the robot to find a way to fix the glitch, but it's too late. The robot even tells her that there's no possible correction in its database. The AI then asks if it's really asking her to write a correction code by herself because she's just a robotic butler and doesn't have that capability. Oh well, if it were the real ChatGPT, it would've. Then we see Sabrina at the moment she wakes up from the dream. Two women are by her side, watching tears roll down her face. The older one asks if she's okay. Sabrina says she had a very long dream but can't remember the details, then asks what they were doing in her room. The two women look at each other embarrassed, and one of them says that last night she was sleepwalking, went to the kitchen, took a knife, and was murmuring something like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Sabrina immediately recognizes it as the dream. The servant says she got scared that there might be an accident and called her secretary to come. The secretary immediately asks if Sabrina wants to take a few days off before going back to work. Still crying, Sabrina says it wasn't a dream, it was more than a dream. It was too real. The scene shifts to the city, with cars and people everywhere, honking, sirens, pollution. It was strange for Howard to return to normal life after living in a post-apocalyptic world. Someone bumps into him, a young person in a hurry, who tells him to be careful. Howard apologizes. He had become unaccustomed to the bustling life of the big city. Then he stops at the kiosk where he used to eat before going to work. The cook asks how he's doing, and he says he's okay, or at least he thinks he is. The cook then mentions that a relative of his asked him to find a partner for his daughter, a remarkable girl, and he could introduce her to Howard if he wanted. But when he finished speaking, he saw Howard doing something strange. He was warming himself by the kiosk's fire. The cook even asks if everything is okay with him, and the guy just says he's a bit cold. So the cook asks if he wants him to introduce that girl to him, but Howard says he has a girlfriend now. Then he stops to think about what he said. Even though the memories were extremely real in his mind and heart, it was just a dream, a game, and it's over now. Arriving at the company, Howard sees that it's 7:50 in the morning, and he almost ran late. It feels like it's been millions of years since he last went to work. He feels a hand on his shoulder and someone calling him. It's Donald, his partner, the guy he used to imagine when talking to the mannequin in the game. Howard says that it's been a while since they last saw each other, but Donald doesn't understand. After all, for him, they saw each other last night at that company dinner, remember guys? Howard explains that he was a bit lost at that dinner and might be hungover. Donald reminds him that things are heating up in their department. There's a rumor that some people are going to be laid off, and since he and their boss have never gotten along, he might be one of the first to get the boot. Our protag says it doesn't matter to him. He's going to quit anyway. After all, this was a big, wonderful world, and he had many choices. Why should he bow down and follow rules someone else made for him? Now he's going to the beach to sell his art and live off what nature provides. Donald is surprised by Howard's talk and even remembers him from school. He says that somehow he seems to have changed. Howard asks how so, and Donald says that normally he'd be complaining right now. And it's true. Before the game, Howard was a frustrated guy, constantly striving for the recognition of others. But now, after everything he had been through, he had grown accustomed to working hard for his own life. Then he arrives at his desk, and he's finally fully immersed in the real world again. What should he do? Our protag had spent so much time away from work that he couldn't even remember where he left off with his tasks. He starts jotting down some clients to get in touch with, but without much certainty about what he's doing. And I ask you guys, if he's going to quit anyway, why is he doing this? Well, he gives up on what he was doing and crumples up the paper. Then he simply tosses the crumpled sheet backward and into the trash can without even looking. At that moment, he realizes there really was something different about him. Howard tears another sheet of paper and this time takes some distance. He aims, and at that moment, it's as if everything around him disappears. There's only him and his target, and he can feel the exact distance and force he needs to throw. Then he throws, and there it is, a beautiful three-point shot. He's impressed. It's as if his body adjusted the angle and force automatically. Then he finally realizes this is his reward for winning the challenge. He unlocked this precise throwing skill. Howard is left baffled as to how this is possible. He thought the ability could only work within the game, so he decides to try hitting a trash trash can even further away, and when he throws the paper ball, it hits his boss square in the face. The boss, trying to maintain his composure, simply tells Howard to come to his office. And, my friend, our protag already knew he was in trouble. The gossip in the office begins immediately, with his colleagues speculating that he's going to be fired. One says they never liked him, another even laughs, claiming to have heard that he's in debt. These guys are vultures. Donald, who is his only real friend there, is tense for his friend, wondering what's wrong with him today. Inside the boss's office, he tells Howard to sit down. As he does, the boss pours a cup of tea and then tells Howard that he really shouldn't have underestimated him. Howard doesn't understand what he means, but there's not much time for the boss to explain. He says that during the 2 years he worked there, he always dedicated himself a lot, but today he made a small mistake. So if he leaves today, he has the right to at least receive his last month's salary. Then the boss goes over to him and hugs him, saying that Howard owes him a big thank you for teaching him so many things in the last 2 years. And that's when our protag gets even more confused. The boss continues, saying that the company is going to create a new department that will be led by a certain Mr. Liu, and that this Mr. Liu insisted on having him on the team. So we understand why this boss is trying to suck up to our protag, even though Howard tells him he has no idea who this Mr. Liu is. The boss says that just like him, of course, Mr. Liu must have noticed his great potential, and he knew from the beginning that one day he would rise in the company. That's why he gave him more tasks than the others, so that he could learn things. Yeah, right. Howard tells him that he was thinking about quitting, and the boss says that a great opportunity has come his way. People have been saying that the average salary for the folks in this new department would be 20% higher. The scene cuts, and we see that Howard has already told his buddy Donald about this promotion. He says that in any case, he didn't know where he would go if he quit. Maybe it's even better for him to stay a little longer. Then someone appears asking why he is. That brown noser who at the company dinner could only stare at Sabrina's cleavage. He's upset because he's been sucking up to their boss forever and hasn't gotten anything so far. He asks what Howard did to get this. Before our protag can respond, the boss appears and tells the guy to shut up, giving that little cough. Then we see that he's with this Mr. Liu. He apologizes for what they just witnessed and tells Howard to accompany him to his office. Mr. Liu immediately says he can't ignore the negative vibes from their department. He is? Yes, he is. And he asks the brown noser if he's doubting his ability to select a capable employee. The guy is shocked and says, "No, of course not, Mr. Liu." The boss then scolds him harshly, says he should have taught him a lesson a long time ago, that he's always hasty and reckless, and that the position of team leader should go to someone better. So, he asks Donald, our protag's buddy, if he wants to become the new team leader. Donald immediately says yes, and that he will do a good job. Finally, the boss says Howard didn't need to work today. He should pack his things and get ready to work in the new department. Howard just agrees, but realizes the boss is only buttering him up because Mr. Liu is there. Speaking of him, he tells Howard that there will be a get-together for the folks from the new department after office hours. They will discuss how things will work and so on, and he can use the opportunity to get to know his new colleagues at the party. Then he turns to the rest of the office staff, who were obviously just keeping an eye on everything to gossip later, and tells everyone that the rumors they've been talking about that everyone from their department will be fired are false, and they don't need to worry. Everyone's job is safe. He says it's time to get back to work, and then says goodbye to everyone. Howard watches him leave, wondering why this guy was so nice to him out of the blue. After all, they had never even seen each other before. As for Mr. Liu, he gives one last look at our protag and thinks he seems like just an average employee, and wonders why Sabrina asked him to pull strings and put him in the new department. Interesting. Some time passes and we see our protag talking to his parents on the phone. His mother asks if he's coming home for the spring festival because it's been 2 years since he last visited. Howard asks how they're doing, how his father is, and she says everything is fine, telling him to please take care of himself. Howard says he's doing well at work, mentions his promotion, and says that they will soon be able to pay off the debt. His mother apologizes for putting him through so much difficulty in recent years and says they owe a lot to him. Howard says it's okay, and all of this will be over soon. And then out of nowhere, a coworker calls our protag. She introduces herself as Sandy Dye and says she's the team leader of the marketing department, and she saw his photo on the payroll. Howard greets her, and she asks if he's going to the get-together for the new department. And by the way, family, this get-together will be at a mansion. Yes, the mansion where our protag lived during the apocalypse with Sabrina. She says that Mr. Liu likes to throw parties at his house and that they should go together. Howard agrees, realizing the fact that in the dream, he lived all this time in Mr. Liu's mansion. Sandy says he needs to know that Mr. Liu is obsessed with cleanliness, and he should be careful when he's there. Howard has a flashback of him coming home after the hunt, covered in blood and with muddy feet, making a mess on the entire floor. She advises him not to use the bathroom, and Howard remembers Sabrina scolding him for never putting the toilet seat down. Finally, she tells him not to enter any other room in the house, especially not his bedroom. And Howard remembers him and Sabrina. Well, you know what he remembers. Sandy asks what happened because he seems a bit embarrassed, and he just says he's fine. Then they both hear screams, someone shouting, "Thief!" A thief had stolen a woman's purse and taken off. Howard sees it and immediately takes Sandy's bag. She doesn't understand what's happening. He starts aiming at the guy and she says it's too far to try to hit him,